Hey, I'm Blair Best, and tonight on The Story, we begin with a look at the criminal justice system in Multnomah County. A new audit was just released showing that when people violate their parole, they're being sent to jail for much longer and not getting the services that they may need to prevent them from committing new crimes.
When people get out of jail, they have nowhere to go. They be lost.
The changes Multnomah County's Community Justice Department is now tasked with making. It's our big story tonight. The audit looked at policies and practices of Multnomah County's Department of Community Justice and how they impact people on post-prison supervision and probation. The Department of Community Justice is responsible for overseeing those supervision services, think parole officers. So what sparked this audit? Well, today I sat down with Multnomah County Auditor Jennifer McWork to find out.
So in 2022, my office issued a performance audit on jail conditions, and we saw some disproportionate impacts on people of color in that report, and we're really curious about what we might see if we looked at what happens on probation and parole for adults, and just the connection between potential jail sanction days that can occur when you're on probation and parole and time within the jails.
So that brings us to the three main findings of this latest audit released today. The first was despite a decrease in the total number of people on supervision between 2019 and 2024, the average technical jail sanction days nearly doubled in length. That's when someone on probation, say, fails to report to a meeting with their parole officer. The audit found that people who make that type of violation are most of the time sent back to jail and for longer periods of time. The second finding in the audit was that Black and Native American people are disproportionately sanctioned to jail more frequently, and they stay there for longer. And the third major finding was the number of referrals to resources like housing and mental health services are inadequate to meet the needs of those on supervision. So let's start with the first finding there. Sending people to jail for what are considered technical violations, like missing a meeting or failure to report, something that is not considered a public safety threat. Here's why the county auditor thinks sending people back to jail for that type of violation can be a problem.
So there's lots of impacts to people's networks, social networks, their job networks, their ability to stay housed when they're put in jail for periods of time when it's the result of one of those technical sanctions.
Today, I talked with this man, Kenneth McGrew. He's a peer mentor supervisor at Miracles Club, a Portland-based support group, helping people reintegrate back into the community after being released from jail or prison.
When people get out of jail, they have nowhere to go. They be lost. And 9 times out of 10, when people get out of jail, they have no resources and no people depending on them. They're going to go back to the same thing they know, and that's gangs and drugs and things like that.
And Kenneth knows what that's like from experience.
So when I was going through the jail system, and when I got out of jail, they just released me back to the jail. I feel like I was just released back to the wild with no structure, no directions. And first thing I went to is back to the drugs and the addiction and guns and all those type of things. So I know how I feel to just be released to jail with nowhere to go.
Now, when it comes to sending people on supervision back to jail for those technical violations I mentioned earlier, the county auditor recommended that the Department of Community Justice only do that when there is a direct public safety threat. Kenneth agrees.
I think sometimes, you know, when jail come about, people get sent back to jail, and then, you know, they get taken away from their family because 9 times out of 10, their family need them. You know, so I feel like give them another option. You know, it should be more option than then straight back to jail.
The county auditor recommends the department create a policy that clearly defines what a public safety threat is as it pertains to sending people back to jail after making a technical violation of their supervision. Here's Denise Pena, the director of Multnomah County's Department of Community Justice.
So the challenge about that is that failure to report is a technical violation. But if a client if their whereabouts are unknown and we don't have a way to get a hold of them and they are no longer staying at where they have reported that they're staying, we have an obligation and an expectation from our criminal justice partners to take action on that.
And I think that's true. I definitely see their point. But there's also a lot of opportunity, I think, that DCJ has to really look at the technical sanctions and find other ways to help people reduce having those sanctions in the first place.
And then there is this accountability piece, though, where we have the parole board or the courts are going to be imposing sanction, and there's an expectation that our clients are going to be following and be in compliance with those conditions. And so we will work with them to be successful, but if a client is violating a no contact order, for example, creating new victims in the community, continuing to cause harm, we will need to take action on that. I think about 80% of those on supervision are on supervision for committing a person-to-person crime.
So, unclear at this point if that recommendation to not jail people after certain technical violations will be fully implemented. But then there's the piece about inadequate referrals to services like mental health and addiction treatment. From 2019 to 2023, 38% of people on supervision had a history of homelessness, 26% had a history of mental illness, and 40% had history with substance abuse. According to the audit, those people aren't getting connected to adequate services. Again, Kenneth knows what that's like. He was homeless for about a year downtown Portland.
And I just needed some type of guidance to show me how to live clean and sober and, work an honest job, because some people be out in the streets for so long they forget how to live.
The audit recommends the Department of Community Justice try and get more money from the county to expand resources. Well, easier said than done, since the county just cut about $2.8 million from the Department of Community Justice in this year's budget. And the department is expecting more cuts from their state funding too.
We certainly can advocate for funding, but we are unable to control what the funding actually looks like. And when you think about the core function of parole and probation, it is to provide supervision and the services we really do rely on in the community to help us with those. And just with the current budget state, we already took significant reductions in our FY26 county general funds, and we are anticipating more reductions with our state funding coming up.
Okay, the director also says the lack of housing and mental health resources in Multnomah County makes it harder for them to connect people with care.
We can refer if the service is there. And so if there are reductions for, let's say, the mental health services that the auditor really elevated as a need for our clients and for our community, one of the recommendations was to increase access. And so again, we can refer if the agency is there to help them, but if it's not, or if there's a wait list, which is something that our clients unfortunately encounter, then we are unable to fully meet that goal.
The audit also revealed that Black and Native American people were sanctioned for violations more often and were sent to jail for longer periods of time. From January 2019 to December 2023, of those on supervision, 21% were Black and African American people, yet they made up 28% of those sanctioned. The audit found that parole officers during that same time sanctioned white people the least.
I feel like that's a shame, because this America, we should have an equal opportunity. And when people in jail of color, they be hold a little bit longer. They don't give the opportunities to go to treatment and things like that, like other people do. So.
Now, the director of the Department of Community Justice says they're already taking steps to address racial inequity.
And so I think we've started off with all of our staff last year. In addition to our POs, we did a mandatory implicit bias training for all of our employees, and we had a great completion rate to those. And so that is just one of the many steps that we are taking.
So those were just the top 3 findings from the audit. If you want to read the entire report, head to our website, kgw.com, and look for this story. We'll have it linked there for you. The Department of Community Justice has until the end of May 2027 to fully implement all of the auditor's recommendations.
I'm really hopeful that DCJ will implement these recommendations, because I think ultimately they're better for everyone in our community. If you have people who are able to kind of rehabilitate and become part of the community again, they're not going to be committing crimes. It means we're going to be safer and have a more livable county.
But yes, we're going to follow through with the recommendations that we are able to follow through on.
In 2 weeks, so on July 24th, the auditor is presenting this report to the Board of County Commissioners, along with a list of recommendations for the commissioners to work on, including making sure there is enough housing and mental health treatment for people discharged from supervision. Okay, now it's your turn to weigh in. What do you think about the findings in this report? Does anything stand out to you? Do you have experience with Multnomah County's criminal justice system? Does this track? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Well, today, Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley announced he will run for another term in the Senate. If he wins, this would be his 4th term in office. He says he decided to run again because, as a Democrat, he wanted to continue to use the office to oppose President Trump. He says we're in, quote, dark and dangerous times, with the president misusing the executive branch.
We've seen it through the open disregard of the laws affecting the executive branch. For example, when Trump decided to fire the inspector generals, and the law says you can't do that unless it's for cause and unless you give notice, but he did it without notice and without cause. We've seen a stiff arming of the court. We've seen an effort to run over the top of due process. Due process sounds like a legalistic term. That's our guardian of our freedom that keeps an overbearing government from seizing us off the street. Due process is the protection of freedom, and this administration is running over it.
Merkley says he also wants to focus on making life more affordable for Americans and bringing reforms to the Senate. But he says he wasn't sure about running for office again or whether he should open the door for someone else.
I wanted to be very thoughtful about this question of running for a 4th term. And if you had asked me a few months ago, and if I had confided in you, which I kept my thoughts to myself, just Mary and I, as we wrestled with it, said we were leaning towards not running. But the magnitude of the darkness and danger that Trump is presenting, so dark and so dangerous that I am calling on everyone to be off the couch, to hold their electeds accountable, and to do so fiercely.
Merkley, by the way, is 68 years old. That's just over the median age for U.S. senators, which is about 64 years old. Fellow Oregon Senator Ron Wyden is older. He'll be a few months shy of 80 when his current term ends in January 2029. Well, still ahead, as people in Texas deal with disaster from flash floods, questions are coming up about why some people were never alerted about the emergency. With floods here in the Northwest, along with wildfire and other emergencies, we're talking with Oregon's emergency management about how you can make sure you know what's going on. That's when The Story returns. Well, right now, Oregon's Department of Emergency Management is activated because of the elevated risk from fire season. It's an important system that lets all of us know when it's time to go when natural disasters strike. It's a system facing some tough questions right now in Texas, where flooding has killed more than 100 people, and some survivors say they had no warning at all of the danger. Here in Oregon, we face danger from flooding too. Earlier this year in Harney County, when floods displaced 80 to 100 people in Burns back in April, and many of them are still working to rebuild. Well, that led us to wonder, how prepared is Oregon's emergency management for these types of disasters? Celine Stevens is joining us along the Willamette with some answers tonight. So Celine, let's start with that disaster in Harney County. What did emergency managers do?
Blair, so overall, the Oregon Department of Emergency Management helps with resources and amplifying that critical information. So in the case of Harney County, the county needed the department's help with their levee, meaning they needed resources like sandbag filling, sandbag machine, people to fill those sandbags, as well as sand.
Okay, so tell us how the department monitors for potential natural disasters and lets people know what to do.
So it actually all starts with the National Weather Service. They're staffed with meteorologists that are constantly monitoring and forecasting the latest weather, and then they work on getting that message put out on their own platforms, as well as working with emergency management and government partnerships.
Okay, so is there anything we can do at home to make sure we're ready for emergencies?
So both the National Weather Service and the Oregon Department of Emergency Management both emphasize the importance of people being aware of their risk levels, so knowing where they're living and where they're heading and if it's in a hazardous area. One really easy way to do that is by staying up to date with alerting tools like OR Alert, that's OR-Alert, or just by staying up to date with the National Weather Service.
Okay, Celine Stevens along the Willamette tonight. Thanks so much. Well, during wildfire season, local power companies are trying to make sure their equipment doesn't spark a fire. Portland General Electric is using new tools like artificial intelligence to stay ahead of the threat. Chris McGinnis has a look at how it works.
PGE maintains more than 30,000 miles of power lines. Now, as conditions grow riskier, the utility is deploying real-time weather monitoring and launching its first ever AI fire modeling platform to help forecast when and where power shutoffs might be needed. When wildfire risk rises, timing matters.
So we've invested in a lot of tools here at PGE to really help get that big picture of how weather will impact our assets.
Portland General Electric has a new AI model to help their meteorologists stay one step ahead. How new?
This year.
This new AI fire modeling platform uses satellite data to find hotspots, terrain and fuel moisture data to track how combustible the surrounding landscape is, coupled with weather forecasts to simulate if a fire were to ignite, where might it spread, up to 12 hours in advance.
If that is all conducive and if a fire started, where would that fire go? And is that going to impact any of our power lines? Do we need to potentially shut that one off?
Forecasters can customize this new AI model for hotter temperatures, drier fuels, or stronger wind, and then recalculate the spread potential.
And with this, we could overlay our power lines and see if anything is in the way, basically, of this potential fire spread. So we would know that we may need to proactively de-energize a line for safety.
The modeling is powered in part by data from 92 weather stations across the region, tracking temperature, wind, humidity, and fuel conditions. PGE is constantly adding to those.
And that is to monitor these conditions and then look at the outages that may have occurred.
Historically, given similar weather conditions.
And then we can, really give like an outage forecast based on that.
PGE's in-house meteorologists use the AI tool alongside daily coordination with the National Weather Service and fire agencies.
We will talk pretty much every day, especially in the middle of fire season. We are on coordination calls with them. We are a public safety partner of theirs, and we are always have an open line of communications.
And while red flag warnings still guide major decisions, this platform gives PGE added flexibility when they see localized threats to their power lines.
It's just really getting the subject matter expertise to line up with, the the company's knowledge of where their risk is and what they need to be aware of.
The new modeling system is just one of several tools added to PGE's wildfire strategy this year. Combined with field sensors and a growing weather data network, PGE says it's aiming to make faster, more informed decisions when conditions turn dangerous. Chris McGinnis, KGW News.
Well, when we come back, how scientists in Washington state are working to save sea stars. It's a species that has a huge impact on our oceans, and they were nearly wiped out. But now researchers are seeing success. We'll explain how. More than 10 years ago, a mysterious disease wiped out much of the sea star population here on the West Coast. Removing that link in the food chain allowed sea urchin numbers to explode, devastating underwater kelp forests. But researchers for the University of Washington are making progress rebuilding the sea star population. Here's meteorologist Leah Pizzetti with a look.
In this Friday Harbor lab, University of Washington researchers have spent more than 5 years growing sea stars from these tiny critters to large, beautiful creatures. Last July marked a major milestone. I was there when they released the first lab-grown sea stars into the wild.
It's a million questions that we've had about what these stars will do that we've been thinking about for years, and now we're finally going to get some answers.
Since then, they've been monitoring the stars' movement. Research scientist Jason Hoden says they had no idea what would happen.
We might see them for a day or two or maybe a week and then never see them again. And that could mean that obviously we don't want to believe that they died out there, but it could be that they died out there and we just didn't see it, or that they wandered away and that we just never see them again.
But now, about 1 year later, and this success story continues.
That's not what happened. What actually happened was we saw at least the 2-year-old class, which I said were about a salad plate size are now dinner plate size. And we've seen at least 3 of those 10 within the last few months. And one as recently as like a month ago.
The multiple sea stars that are staying put represent hope for saving other parts of the Pacific as well.
Part of the main reason we're doing this is not just because we love this sea star, although I think that's good enough reason, but that's not the reason why we're really doing this. The reason we're doing this is because we think this sea star has outsized importance.
In 2014, disease wiped out sea stars along nearly all West Coast beaches, from Mexico to Alaska. Since then, there's been a domino effect in the Pacific Ocean. Sea stars eat sea urchins, so the sea urchins exploded in population. The excess urchins then began eating away at kelp, which was already suffering from warming waters, and the underwater forest was essentially wiped out. But this discovery that lab-grown sea stars don't leave when released could be huge for reversing that.
One really exciting possibility that the research that we've been doing demonstrates is that if you put them in a spot that they like, and if they like that spot, if they like eating sea urchins, for example, and you put them in a spot with a lot of sea urchins, they could probably hang around there and have a big effect.
Simultaneously, Hoden says scientists are almost ready to release a report that details the disease that wiped them out in the first place. This information will further help them place the lab-grown sea stars in the open ocean.
When we know the cause, then we can develop a test. And we can develop a test, then we can know that any stars that we're going to put out in the field are not carriers of this disease that could then devastate the wild populations.
This years-long research is not done yet, but it's steadily moving toward replenishing a crucial Pacific species.
In some of the hardest hit areas like California, experts say it could take years before any lab-grown sea stars are released into the wild. Leaders there are being cautious, waiting for results from the study showing the cause of the disease that wiped them out. And those results are expected any day now. Well, that's the end of our show, folks. Thanks so much for watching. The good stuff is coming your way next. And don't forget, everyone has a story to tell. If you ever miss an episode of The Story at 6:30, we re-air it at 8:30 and 10:30 p.m. on our TV app, KGW+. It'll also be there the next day at 11:30 a.m. And you can get that free app now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. I'm off tomorrow, won't be back until Tuesday, but the team has some great content coming your way. In the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday night.